I'm Dana Shagru with CEA World Greenhouse Produce, an innovative brand that engages with the rapidly expanding global greenhouse produce industry through a variety of platforms. Our mission is to educate and connect greenhouse produce growers and industry allies to help them better understand and sustainably advance the global food industry. On this episode of CEA Talks, I'll be speaking with Shreyas Kusik, an assistant professor in mechanical engineering at Georgia Tech. Shreyas, welcome to CEA Talks.
Thanks so much, Dana. I really appreciate the chance to get to talk a bit about robotics and how it can potentially make an impact in the controlled environment agriculture world.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about it too. From what I understand, after speaking with growers, the tedious, repetitive tasks, if those could be somehow automated, it sounds like it would make their jobs more enjoyable
Right.
and their day-to-day tasks more streamlined.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the most commercially viable examples happening right now, and just to be clear, I'm a researcher in academia, so everything I'm thinking about is 10 to 15 years into the future. But I just had the chance to visit some companies in the Netherlands who have a lot of work with greenhouses and automating greenhouse controls. So there, you can think of maybe one of these greenhouses as a giant robot, but the parts that are automated are how the vents or sunshades are opening, and then how the air conditioning system or HVAC system, for lack of a better phrase, sorry, it's my lack of knowledge there, but basically how the autonomous airflow is being decided upon. I mean, usually you have a very experienced grower who figures out a schedule that works in that part of the world for those lighting conditions for those plants. And given that data, we can then train, so to speak, a robot greenhouse to replicate the grower's expertise. What this lets the grower do then is instead of having to manually move everything around, just fiddle with some numbers on a computer. So the grower's role doesn't go away, but it does change.
Well, while we're on the topic of automation, I feel like that ties back to jobs and how robotics could affect them in the CEA industry. So I know it's a fear that robots could potentially take farming jobs, but you've said before that they could potentially create more of them. Could you elaborate more on that?
Yeah. Just to set the historical context, I think this is a really classic problem with all technology. There's typically a fear that, especially from skilled workers, that they will be needed less. But that's often paired with new skills that are created. And I think I'll give it a historical example and then maybe explain how this relates to today and controlled environment agriculture. So the classic example is the Luddites from in England, right? During the Napoleonic Wars. They were there were skilled workers who were weaving and they were afraid that the automated looms would replace them. And in fact, that's true that in many ways did happen. The thing is that when you have these automated machines, you need mechanics. You need people to design, build, install them because doing all of that is still very, very hard to automate. The other concern that those workers had, and hopefully I'm not misrepresenting them, but the other big concerns they had were that their handcrafted artifacts or woven, hand woven textiles would either shoot up in price or be differently valued. They were worried about being replaced by lower skilled, in their own words, lower skilled workers. So this led to a rebellion against this concept of in some sense, job loss, but actually they were fully aware that the total number of jobs was not actually reducing. In fact, the total number of jobs was increasing because there were way more people who were able to run these automated looms. But the specialized or artisanal work, that was the value of that in society was changing because all of a sudden textiles were becoming much more easy to produce and sell at lower cost. So to relate that back to what we could see with agriculture, I think many farmers, I would guess, and again, I'm a roboticist, so I would hope to learn from growers. What we see with many crops is the ability of, I mean, you buy a giant tractor with complicated equipment and you pull that through your field and it does all kinds of cool things, right? There's special technologies for planting, fertilizing, harvesting autonomously, and these are all things that people used to do in fields, and people still do in certain crops. There are many crops where this is just not feasible because of the complexity of automating it. In some sense, that has reduced the number of jobs because you don't need to hire 100 people to go work in the field to plant one whole field. On the other hand, it means that the land that we use, like we get much more land farmed with much fewer people. And maybe this is a way in the controlled environment agriculture world that we can think about how automation technologies will change things. So right now, as I mentioned earlier, a grower would have to go in potentially every day, usually every day, to work for several hours. And that means that the total number of indoor facilities that a single grower can work in is limited. If part of that is automated, then that same grower could potentially work in many different facilities. So the number of jobs hasn't really reduced, but the work allocation has changed so that one person is now able to manage many more facilities. The part that is weird, and this is a going back to the loom example, if you start putting robots in these places, then you either the grower has to learn how to take care of a robot, which is frankly what will happen in many cases, in the same way that I think a lot of growers are, interacting with the companies that are building tractors and other large farm equipment to be able to maintain and repair their own farm equipment. In that same way, we will almost certainly see either a need to hire mechanical engineers and roboticists like myself, or the growers' roles will change from less focus on the plants themselves to more focus on maintaining the hardware that keeps the facility up and running. In that sense, there's a potential to create more jobs. It's an oversimplified thing. I think I want to be very careful. Um, if you look at any individual grower's experience, it's going to be a special, particular thing to that person. The idea that we can generalize across all growers and all robots is a very potentially very coarse model of the reality. But I think there's perhaps less reason to be afraid of like jobs getting destroyed than may appear at first glance.
Gotcha, that definitely makes sense. Well, moving forward, what do you think the primary focus of robotics will be in CEA within the next 5 years or so?
Yeah, this is a great question because it's already happening. What we see today, there's a ton of work, as I mentioned earlier, in fruit harvesting. So this has been a lot of collaboration with breeders. My understanding is that people have actively bred plants like strawberries to present the fruit in a way that's more harvestable. And this helps human harvesting as well. Like this helps everybody, but it makes it much more feasible for a robot to actually go in and harvest a whole crop. So that's the thing that I think you can already buy a product, or at least there are companies who are about to start selling things. Very similarly, in tomatoes, there's a need to prune branches that are not going to produce fruit so that the plant can concentrate its efforts on the fruit-bearing stem or the fruit-bearing branches. There have been efforts for maybe 3 decades to build reliable pruning robots, and they're still not quite there, but we're getting so close. I got to see one a couple of weeks ago. Maybe to also go back to the job question. Right now, that pruning robot that would take one human an hour to prune, that pruning robot will take 3 or 4 times as long, and it needs 2 humans to watch it and make sure it's doing a good job. But that process of having technicians working with the robot right now is how we make the robot better and how we make the robot closer to being able to go and do the pruning task on its own. So I think pruning and harvesting, we're very close. Hopefully within 5 years, we can see those technologies being deployed. Technologies that we have right now, there's a couple of cool things that we can do with robots that, like I mentioned earlier, we cannot do, or a person would be very, very unwilling to do. So one of them is nighttime UV light pest mitigation. So I believe, I don't remember exactly what type of pest it is, but there are certain fungi that if you basically autonomously drive a UV light around in your indoor facility, you can kill all these fungi. Or maybe it's a different type of pest, but the point is that I don't think a person really wants to drive around with a UV light. It's not very good for your health. Like you really don't want to get skin cancer. It's not even good for the plants, except in very small doses, right? So this is something that a robot can do that a human really shouldn't be doing without wearing a ton of specialized equipment. Another similar task is the photography task I mentioned earlier. So you have a lot of companies selling autonomous mobile robots that can go take pictures and create extremely repeatable photographs. So you can observe plant growth over time and then use data from that visual representation to perhaps predict things about the plant. So if you have a ton of data of images of plants growing over time, maybe you can predict future yield or future disease or catch disease early. Fundamentally, the task is just taking millions of photos from the exact same location over and over and over, which people do not want to do. And this is a technology that's already being sold. And then finally, in the next 5 years, I think many more greenhouses are specifically greenhouses because that's perhaps the biggest chunk of the controlled environment agriculture market. But many of these facilities have the potential for automation with maybe a less startup cost. So automating the blinds or curtains, the vents, the aeration systems. This is stuff that you can already buy, and for many growers is already accelerating their production capability. I think what we'll see in the next 5 years is a larger part of the market will be using that type of automation. And then from that, we'll have a growth in basically a lot of the non-contact tasks. So to summarize everything I just talked about, all of this is like maybe the stuff that is most likely to be automated in the next 5 years is stuff that doesn't require a robot to touch anything, but just changes parameters on air, water, fertilizer, and light.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how those changes will affect production in the next 5 years. It's exciting to hear that they're already happening.
Yeah, I think this is something that growers, hopefully, the takeaway for current growers is that if you have a lot of expertise, one way to preserve your expertise for your facility is to basically like teach your facility as a robot, right? To use your expertise of when to do different parts of like running a greenhouse, parts of those that can be automated by using growers' expertise to sort of teach the greenhouse robot. You preserve the expertise and you make that one grower capable of running potentially more greenhouses with that same amount of daily effort, potentially.
Thank you again, Shreyas, for joining me this afternoon. And we look forward to seeing how robotics continue to affect the CEA industry. And I'm sure we'll talk again soon.